Draft analyst Chris Trapasso has got his latest mock draft on CBSSports.com, and the headline involves a trade at the top. The Las Vegas Raiders move up to take Shedeur Sanders, which leads to a run of quarterbacks. After Sanders, it's Cam Ward to Cleveland, Jalen Milroe to New York, and then Tennessee ends up with edge rusher Abdul Carter at 6. All right, let's bring in the guy that put that mock together, and that's going to be Traps along with Josh Edwards, Danny Kanell joining me here on set. So, Chris, give me the lowdown on this trade here and the Raiders going up to get their guy.
This is all about Tom Brady and his connection that goes all the way back to Shedeur Sanders in high school. I feel like with Brady being a part owner of this Raiders organization, we've heard a lot of rumblings that he's really running the show here. Even with Pete Carroll in stow now, I think Tom Brady will do whatever is needed to get a quarterback, and one that kind of plays similarly to how he played, from in the pocket and more of a cerebral game than anything else. And this is not a great quarterback class. The Raiders have had a glaring need at the quarterback position for the last few years. So I think Brady will really spearhead this aggressive move up all the way to number 1 to get Shedeur Sanders.
The only question I would have is why not get the package deal then? Why not bring in Coach Prime to coach Shedeur in this one? So that's the one where I really thought there was a legitimate chance that could happen, and wondering why it didn't is another story. And bringing back somebody who's getting up there in age to provide some stability to the organization, I get it. But I have a hard time envisioning Shedeur going number 1. I think Cam Ward is QB1 in a class by himself. Then I think it's Shedeur. Then I think there's a pretty massive drop-off. We'll get to him. But it's very clear the Raiders have to do something. They definitely need a quarterback. If they did trade up, I'd be a little bit surprised if they passed on Cam Ward, even with that relationship that Tom Brady has with Shedeur.
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I've got Shedeur as the quarterback 1 in this draft class or Cam Ward as QB1 in this draft class by a significant margin. Sanders, I thought, had a better first half of the season, but we didn't see what we needed to consistently during the second half of the season. So, yes, I do agree with Traps that the Raiders are desperate for a change at quarterback, and I think that they would like to come out of this draft with quarterback 1. I just think it's a little bit rich to move up the board, give up what they would have to take a player that I don't think, quite frankly, is as good as Cam Ward.
Ward goes 2 to Cleveland, then Jalen Milroe to New York. Now, Traps, last time you and I got together, at the time you had Milroe going to Cleveland at 5 with a healthier Deshaun Watson. Now, take me through the thought process this time with Milroe at 3.
All right, well, I feel like Cleveland is going to draft a quarterback. And then the Giants, after everything that's transpired with Saquon Barkley, I feel like John Mara is usually not the owner that's stepping in and saying, do this, don't do that. But at this point, with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll being retained after such a disastrous season and a glaring need at the quarterback position after everything that transpired with Daniel Jones, sitting there at 3 with 2 quarterbacks already off the board, I feel like they would have to reach for a project-type quarterback in Jalen Milroe, who I think could move up boards after the combine. He should test very well, and certainly we know the history. Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll in Buffalo with Josh Allen. Now, I'm not saying that Jalen Milroe is the next Josh Allen, but a similar type where you could use him in the designed run game at first, where he's starting to learn Brian Daboll's system. They just need some type of young promise at the quarterback position, or I think they'll be even more on the hot seat, Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, than they already are.
Oh, this is where I think they missed, Chris. Like, I think last year they had the opportunity, and I think you saw some of that tension between coach and front office, which is why they could get burned. If they take Jalen Milroe at 3, this will set the Giants back for 3 to 4 years. I just don't see it. I think he is a massive project who you're going to have to build a very specific offense around that is going to have limitations. I agree with you. He's going to impress. He's a great young man. He's going to test off the charts. It's going to remind a lot of people of Anthony Richardson. Not quite as big, but he will be a presence to be felt at the combine. He'll test off the charts, but he's not that good of a passer, as with evidence last year. He throws a really good deep ball. He's just too inconsistent underneath. If the Giants do this, I think it's a huge mistake, but some team is probably going to reach on Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, and I don't think Cleveland is locked into taking a quarterback at number 2 either. I think if they view these players as being worthy of one of those selections, then that is the decision that they will make. But I could also see them taking the best player available, whether that's going to be Travis Hunter Jr., the two-way player from Colorado, Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, Abdul Carter, the pass rusher from Penn State. I don't think that they are locked into the quarterback position, but when you get to number 3, Jalen Milroe, I kind of liken it to what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts. They took him in the second round. He wasn't necessarily a refined passer coming out of Oklahoma. They gave him some time to kind of get his feet wet, and they put him in a position where he was in an offense that allowed him to find success early in his career, and then he developed over the course of those years because of the leadership that he had displayed. So Milroe at number 3 overall, I think, is a little bit of a reach, but if he turns out the way that Hurts has for Philadelphia, no one's going to complain about where he was ultimately drafted.
I think the consensus is Milroe is the biggest project, right?
He's the biggest unknown in this whole class,
for sure.
and he's an enigma. But I think, like, Jalen Hurts went to Oklahoma, got another year. I wish Jalen Milroe would have done the same, because I think he really could have benefited from their college football. But, like we were talking about, somebody's going to take him.
I was saying, just off the top of my head, Anthony Richardson, too, another project, and the Colts took him with a really high pick there in the top 5, top 10. All right. Traps, let's get to number 4. You have the Patriots taking Travis Hunter. I'm interested because a lot of analysts have penciled in offensive line help at that slot. But right now, as of today, you've got the two-way star going there.
Yeah, this certainly could be Will Campbell, the offensive tackle from LSU, who's kind of probably going to be the consensus OT1 in this draft class. But I think with Drake May and showing all of that promise in year 1, you want to get a true number 1 receiver, and I think Travis Hunter really blossomed into that type this season. He can get open. He's good after the catch. We saw him track the football as well as any receiver in college football this past season down the field. He can also play corner. I mean, if they want to utilize him in a two-way role, I think he showed that he has the conditioning to do that across the course of a season. Maybe not NFL length, but this would just be a fun playmaker for an offense that got stagnant at times and just needed a true dynamic playmaker for year 2 of the Drake May era. I think this would be a home run selection for the Patriots.
And Josh, let me go to you in terms of Traps going Ashton Jeanty to the Bears at 10. I want to ask you, because I wonder if you have the same sort of slot comp that we've seen in a Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, so an 8 to 12, and under this latest mock coming in at 10.
Yeah, I think Jeanty is that caliber of a prospect. I think he's a little bit better of a runner than Gibbs, but not quite as dynamic. So when you look at Ben Johnson now being in Chicago, it makes sense that he would want his Jahmyr Gibbs type dynamic weapon for that offense. What I have typically done in mock drafts is I've given him an offensive lineman, because I think before he can afford to put that player into this offense, I think he needs to upgrade the offensive line. I think he needs to have that formidable front that he had in Detroit that allows him to do some of that gimmicky, gadgety type stuff on offense before he can drop in a player like Ashton Jeanty. But in terms of the talents, I think this is absolutely a home run. I think at number 10 overall, you're talking about that caliber of a player. He's worthy of that selection.
All right, guys, hang tight. We're going to take a break here on CBS Sports HQ Spotlight. We're going to tease the mid-round picks coming up in just a little bit. And we'll also tackle some of the other teams who got eliminated on Championship Sunday. It's an off-season look at the Commanders and Bills next. Welcome back to the show. Here are picks 11 through 20. Trapasso in similar mind with Ryan Wilson in terms of James Pierce Jr. going to the 49ers at 11. New draft, same old story when it comes to an Ohio State wide receiver. Emeka Egbuka goes to Indy at 14. And then rounding out the top 20 corner, Jahdae Barron out of Texas going to Denver. All right, back here with the fellas. And Trapasso, though, let's focus on number 12 with the Cowboys. Now, can we assume that if Jeanty's there at 12, they go that route? But if he's not and goes to the Bears at 10, Tyler Warren's there up next for them.
Yeah, I got to say, I had done so many mock drafts where Ashton Jeanty went to the Cowboys because that seemed like such a perfect pairing. Ben Johnson goes there. Like Josh said, that would kind of be his Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Ty Warren would make a lot of sense for the Cowboys. Their second leading receiver this past year was Jake Ferguson. He caught 59 passes, but only for 8.4 yards per catch. And certainly Warren, we saw him at Penn State this year catching passes from Drew Aller. He is a vertical seam stretcher, over 100 catches, over 1,200 yards. He was the heartbeat of that offense. I think opposite CeeDee Lamb, or I guess down the middle from CeeDee Lamb, someone like Tyler Warren would be a huge benefit to Dak Prescott coming off his injury.
Chris, I totally agree. I think everyone knows that they have to give some help to CeeDee Lamb so he's not getting so much attention and coverage. But look at what the Chiefs did with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill early on in that career. The tight end can be just as much of a relief, especially if it's a pass-catching tight end, the way Tyler Warren is coming out of Penn State. He was phenomenal, able to do so many different things. They lined him up in 6 and 7 different positions, in the backfield, in the slot wide receiver, out wide at wide receiver. He can do a little bit of everything. My only concern with him is Brock Bowers just set a standard for rookie tight ends that I don't know if anybody could live up to, but Tyler Warren will be up for the challenge.
All right, let's pivot to the latter third of the first round, and there's a string of offensive tackles or linemen that go here. And Trapasso, I want to really focus on Kelvin Banks because in your latest mock, he goes at 25 to Texas. We have other draft analysts, and I'm curious to get Josh's evaluation of Banks, but like Ryan loves him in the top 5 or top 10. So give me sort of the scouting report for Banks Jr.
Yeah, he was really good in pass protection this season at Texas. I thought down the stretch and as they played better competition in the college football playoff, not quite as strong as a pass blocking specialist, but I think the Houston Texans, we know, I mean, CJ Stroud's sack rate increased to almost 9% this year. Usually see those sack rates come down for the high caliber quarterbacks after their rookie season. And I thought outside of the injuries for Houston, the biggest problem this season, why they didn't advance further into the playoffs than they did a season ago, was the offensive line. Like CJ Stroud getting sacked so many times, 8 times in that divisional round loss to the Chiefs. I think Kelvin Banks, there's usually always a premier talent that slips a little bit in the draft. He would be that one for me. I think he's probably more of a mid first round pick, but in this mock he slides, and I think Houston would make him their pick right away.
Yeah, full transparency. I have had Banks going in a similar range in previous mock drafts. I would say it's not probable. I think he's probably gone at this point in the first round, but I don't think it's impossible. He's not the type of offensive tackle prospect like we've seen from Joe Alt, like we've seen from Jedrick Wills and Andrew Thomas and Tristan Wirfs, that whole offensive tackle class. But he is a very good player who has battled through injuries throughout his course, through the course of his career with Texas. If Houston can get him at this stage in the first round, I think that represents great value. But I do think there is a possibility, even though it might be slim, that he is available at this stage in the first round.
All right, let's get to the 2 teams that just got eliminated on Championship Sunday. Traps, what's the Washington outlook? What are some of the team needs going into the offseason?
It's got to be defense. I mean, they were the team that came in with the weakest defense on paper, allowed 55 points in that NFC Championship game. Bobby Wagner was such a great addition for Dan Quinn to kind of be this plug-in leader of that defense this past season for Washington. But given his age, I have them go with Carson Schlesinger from UCLA, the linebacker. He reminds me a lot of Kiko Alonso, who can just play all 3 downs, fluid athletically, great tackler, has upside in coverage. They kind of need the new age Bobby Wagner as they enter year 2 of the Dan Quinn era. Edge rusher, defensive tackle, it's a great class there. So something up front in that front 7 for Washington's defense, I think would make a lot of sense in the late stages of the first round.
Totally agree. Bobby Wagner getting a little bit long in the tooth. We have the luxury now of seeing what Jaden Daniels can do, elevating an entire offense that looked pretty incredible. So now you got to focus on the defense. And I think what you need to see more than what they just saw yesterday getting run through by Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles, you need to do something on that defensive side of the ball. Maybe a little bit surprised at the position at linebacker. Maybe they go for an edge or somebody who can impact the passer a little bit more, but definitely think they're going to go with the defensive help.
Washington arrived to the party maybe a year or two too early, I think, in terms of public perception. And the reality is that it was only Dan Quinn's first year. So the work that he did, the work that general manager Adam Peters did this past season, putting together that roster, yeah, it allowed them to get to the NFC Championship game. But at the same time, this team has a lot of older players. You're going to have to replace them. You look at Frankie Louvu, you look at Bobby Wagner there in the middle. Yeah, that's going to be a point of emphasis for this Washington team this offseason. But I think you're going to see them make some wholesale changes in general, moving on from some of those veterans that they acquired last offseason, get some more consistent play from the running back position as well. But I think Schlesinger is somebody that is going to rise as we get closer to April's draft.
And let's end with Buffalo. Josh, I'll throw it right back at you to get the early returns on what the Bills need. Now, I would assume defense, maybe some depth in that position, but you tell me.
No question. Defensive tackle, I think, is an area that they would look to address, even though they took Dwayne Carter last year. If they can keep the linebacker room healthy, that would be ideal. Safety would be an opportune position for them to look. The offensive line has played pretty well this year. Josh Allen, of course, the way that he plays is able to hide some of those blemishes. You could possibly look for wide receiver help if you don't feel like Amari Cooper is going to be a long-term contributor for your organization. But I do agree. I think defense is ultimately this franchise is going to take in the first round.
I also think Shedeur Stewart at this part in the draft, too, is pretty good value from that standpoint. So I think he could come in and be an impact player right away. But I agree with you guys. They took Keon Coleman last year at receiver. Maybe they look for the defense early. There's some pretty good receivers you can get in the second round if you did want to add to that position. So I like this spot here to attack the defensive line.
Yeah, Shedeur Stewart would be very similar to what the Bills did after their 2020 AFC Championship loss to the Chiefs. They went with Greg Rousseau, who was this tall, long, project-y type defensive end who's blossomed into a really good player in Buffalo. Maybe didn't play his best game last night, but Shedeur Stewart, former number 3 overall defensive line recruit in the country, didn't quite live up to the hype at Texas A&M, but you see the flashes at like 6'6" and 290 pounds, can play inside, can play outside. I think he's going to test through the roof at the combine and could slip this far because the production didn't quite match his traits in college. This would be a good get and a player of need for this Bills defense heading into 2025.
That's another Mock Draft Monday. Our thanks to DK, Traps, and Josh for breaking it all down here on the show. I mentioned Ryan Wilson a couple of times here today. His podcast with Rick Spielman with the first pick. Scan the QR code. RW just coming off the Shrine Bowl week, and now the Senior Bowl is on his next itinerary list. All right, Jimmy Butler returns from another suspension with the trade deadline looming. The latest from the Beyond the Arc crew after the break.